I'm a senior director for communications at the World Wildlife Fund. I got my undergraduate degree at Baylor. I was a journalism major and political science major, and I then went to Syracuse University for graduate school and got an MBA. I grew up reading the newspaper every day, and my dad read the newspaper every day. We were very much a news-focused family, and so journalism was something that appealed to me. It wasn't something that I had thought about before, but it was something that was meaningful to me and that I thought was, a good prospect for a career and that I knew something about. Yeah, so I went to Syracuse for a program in media administration, which was half in the business school and half in the journalism school. I liked the business courses because I'd never taken any business courses as an undergraduate. And so I gravitated over there and ended up getting an MBA. And then in looking for a job, someone working in the business side of a communications company, I heard about an opening for reporters at Dow Jones, and I contacted them and they recruited me, and that's how I started as a financial reporter. I think the thing that set me on the path of being a reporter was not getting the job that I was aiming for. But they said, we're starting up a new wire service here covering financial markets, and you have reporting experience, and that's something that we think you might be good for. And so I followed that path and was able to get a job, and that set me on a path of reporting for the next 27 years. I believe that truth is important. And so being able to tell the truth, to tell stories that enlighten people on situations that they don't otherwise know about is very important. And so I wanted to spend my life and my career telling stories, uncovering things that people didn't want you to know about, telling the truth about situations that people were trying to put in other lights, and being able to help people understand situations that they didn't know much about. Came to journalism at Baylor a little bit late, in the spring of my sophomore year, and so was a little bit behind, and so I had to work fast to catch up. And so I, really worked hard at putting myself into classes, working at the Lariat, doing everything I could to get the experience of writing and telling stories and being able to participate in all of the journalism activities here. I started off on a different path, and so was a little behind when I got on this path and had to make up some time. Well, Baylor was very important in my development, and I knew that the journalism department here could use some advice and some participation from alumni. I thought that we could have an influence on what students were learning, how they were learning about the transition from college to the real world, and that I could provide some insight into what it's like to work in the field of journalism professionally. Well, there was a signal moment here in my journalism work. I was the staff writer for the Lariat, and I was covering the president's office. And so I would have a weekly interview with the president of the university, who at the time was Herbert Reynolds. And I also covered speeches that he gave. And he gave a speech one night to a group in the Student Union building. And he talked about a new computer expert that they were going to be hiring. So this was in 1982. Computers were not ubiquitous like they are now. They were, the personal computer wasn't something that existed yet. And so Baylor was looking to hire someone to bring the university into the computer age. And so I thought this was definitely a story that people should know about. And I went up to President Reynolds after the speech and asked him about it. And he said, well, I'm really not ready to talk about that yet. So I said, okay. And so I went back and the next day started calling around, called the computer science department, called other faculty members that I knew, asking them if they knew about this plan to hire a computer expert for the university. And they did. People had heard about it and they talked about it. And so I wrote a story for the Lariat about the administration going to hire this computer expert. The day after that story appeared, I got a phone call from President Reynolds saying, I thought I told you not to write that story. I said, well, you told me you didn't want to talk about it, but you talked about it in a public speech, and that made it news. And so, as a journalist, my job was to tell the story. And I did that. And that's when I knew I was a journalist. I had told a story that some people didn't want told, but just following what was publicly available information to fill out the story, and it made someone unhappy, but it brought to light a situation. A saying in journalism is that your job is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And so taking news that someone who's comfortable doesn't want out and telling that story is a very important part of being a journalist. Baylor was a crucible for forming me into who I am. I came from a white middle class background in Houston. Wasn't really involved in the church that much, but came here and became used to the atmosphere and learned a lot about what goes into a college that has religion at its center. I went to Syracuse for graduate school, which is a very secular, very different school.
Yeah.
And it was really the foundation that I got here that allowed me to operate in that other atmosphere. I think the most important thing you can do as a student at Baylor in journalism or communications and public relations is to get real world experience through internships, through volunteering at an organization, and really practicing your writing. No matter what field you go into, writing is going to be important. And if you have that skill, you'll be a step ahead of most other people in the field, because most people come into professional positions not knowing how to write well. And so being able to write and tell a story coherently and succinctly is really important. So getting that experience, being able to write, is the most important thing that you can do.